Good afternoon and good morning, and welcome back to this second day of the 22-20 annual conference of CDDF. Today we will have two sessions, and I'll give you a little bit more detail in the coming slides. Michael, can you go to the next one? This slide you've seen before yesterday, at least for those who attended yesterday, just a little bit of information on what you can do with the platform. I think the screen is obvious, and the startup screen of the platform is easy to manipulate and navigate. So please make sure that you go to the stream once you want to access the sessions, and make sure that you enter your questions into the Slido, which is in the top left here. But also for the polling that we will do in a minute, you can use that Slido button there. By pushing on the right one, you can answer your answers to the poll. Next slide, please. We will have two sessions today. The second will be on lessons learned from acceleration in pediatric oncology programs. That will be after the break. But before the break, we will first have session 3, entitled Enhancing the Future of Clinical Trials. Next slide. My name is Jaap Verwey. I introduced myself yesterday. There was supposed to be a co-moderator with me, but Jan Geisler unfortunately informed us yesterday evening that there was a family crisis that he had to have his attention for, which makes, of course, which is fair. So I'll moderate this session on my own. Next slide, please. Before we start, there are two questions for you, on which we would appreciate your answers. And for this, you can use the polling button on the right side of the Slido button. And question 1 is, if you think of this session, which keywords come to mind now when you think of changes in the landscape of trial performance in the years to come? Please feel free to enter any word that comes to mind. It's just a word cloud that we will be building. Go ahead. And while we wait for the results to come in, you will be able to see the buildup of the word cloud while we move on. So please enter your words into this Slido form. It always takes a while before it builds up. There we are, devices. Smaller, I guess that relates to the size of the trial. Decentralization. Real-world data use. DHT. Well, maybe we can stop the entries here, Michael. We will be using the outcome of the Slido once we start the panel discussion. So here's your second question, and I would like to and would appreciate to get your thoughts on this as well. Which aspects will be important to support the changes that you've just highlighted? So what do we really need, and what kind of support do we need to accommodate the changes? Small randomized clinical trial cooperation. As said, there's always a bit of a delay. If anybody has any further thoughts, or if you want to add to the importance of one of the things that are already been mentioned, just put in the same word and it becomes larger, as you can see now. If there are any further thoughts, please add. There's a lot of standardization standards, importance of people, AI. Okay, let's close it here. We will, as I said, use these answers to help enhance the level of our discussion in the panel session after the lectures. So having said that, it's my pleasure to now introduce the first speaker of this first afternoon session, which is Elke Stahl. Elke works at the Clinical Trial Department of BFARM in Germany. She is the national contact point and German member of the Clinical Trial Coordinating and Advisory Group. And she will explain herself in the lecture what that means. She's the BFARM's representative in the European Commission Expert Group on Clinical Trials and co-chair of the Clinical Trial Facilitation and Coordination Group of the CTFG. And like I said, Elke will explain a lot of those abbreviations herself. And she's also a member of the EU CT Information System, or CTIS, working groups from beginning on. Elke will focus on the perspectives of the clinical trials from CTFRG's point of view. So Elke, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I would like to give you a short introduction on the clinical trials facilitation and coordination group's perspective on clinical trials in future. The Clinical Trial Facilitation and Coordination Group is a working group of the heads of medicines agencies and the European Regulatory Network of National Competent Authorities in charge of clinical trials. As you know, clinical trials are authorized and supervised by each concerned member state of the European Union, the national competent authorities and the ethics at the current and since 31st of January by the member state. So therefore, the Clinical Trial Facilitation Coordination Group, CTFG, you could say is a body for clinical trials. The goal is to harmonize and facilitate clinical trials in Europe, and it was started out with the implementation of the Directive 2001/20, and currently we sure work hard on the implementation of the Regulation 536/2014 and the implemented Regulation on Safety Cooperation. So we work for regulatory, scientific, and operational topics and produce common opinions, processes, position, recommendations, and guidances. To give you a flavor what we have done so far as an output, we developed and tested and did a lot of cooperation for clinical trial application approval and substantial modification approval. You may be familiar with the voluntary harmonization procedure, also including ethics, the VHP+. We also developed a process to cooperate in surveillance of clinical trial and assessment of safety. We started out with annual safety reports, introduced the SAMS concept, and lately we developed the procedure for SUSA cooperation. We also did quite a bit on positions, recommendations, papers, which we posted our website. I think the first large one was a recommendation paper on contraception and pregnancy testing in clinical trials. We had a set of question and answer documents on safety issues like the DSUR, the reference safety information. We drew up the evolution in clinical trials with recommendations to initiate and conduct complex clinical trials. We work on best practice, how you could best transfer a clinical trial which is ongoing from the directive to the regulation, what we would require, what is needed, how to act, how to plan it. Currently, the latest document is the question and answer document on in vitro diagnostic regulation and clinical trial regulation. This we have done jointly together with the medical device group of the Commission. It is adopted in the last plenary meeting. It has to be published. So that's ongoing and will come out soon. Further, we look on evolution in clinical trials and try what needs to be addressed or to harmonize throughout the countries, like digitalization or other new methodologies. We also have a lot of cooperation in our network with the Commission and with EMA working groups. You may have seen that the question and answer on regulation, like the safety section, is not totally different from what we have from the CTFG posted. we worked on this. We also supported the implemented recommendations on the auxiliary medical products, how to deal with them, and what could be done to really keep clinical trials ongoing also in our pandemic situation we are in. We give advice to the guidance on first-in-human and early clinical trials, and we developed a couple of best practices for internal use to cooperate, common understanding, especially now with the clinical trial regulation, which just started to be applicable because the CTs was going live on the 31st of January. So, as I said, the clinical trial regulation applies since 31st January 2022. This should be a huge improvement for youth sponsors because it's only now one dossier required. You submit it once and you get back one decision per member state, not two. Only one per member state. It is jointly from the NCA and the ethics. To make this happen, the CTs tool, the IT tool was developed. So it's one submission to all at the same time. You want to perform your studies in the countries. It is a communication and decision hook between you sponsors and us member states. It is also a communication tool for safety issues when they may arise. So watch out for the ad hoc report. If you get a request for further information in the so-called ad hoc report, please take care because it has an impact on your ongoing trial. It is also a tool to cooperate between the member states, not within a member state, but between the member states. And also I would like to make you aware that we still have 1 year of a transition in which you can decide to either submit within the regulation or to submit still within the old directive legal framework. But after 3 years, so latest early 2025, all ongoing clinical trials have to be submitted and transferred to this CTs and clinical trial regulation framework, otherwise the authorizations expires. Something else has happened. As you may be aware, there was a publication by EMA that they have formed an Accelerate Clinical Trials Europe initiative and founded a large coordination and steering group where Commission, HMA, and EMA are jointly steering the innovation in clinical trials within the network strategy 2025 and the pharmaceutical strategy. For detailed information, I would like to refer you to EMA's website. They get a little bit more out of it, but I think the goal here is to really foster clinical trials in Europe and research in Europe. And at the same time, when the regulation started at the 31st of January, the clinical trial facilitation and coordination group stopped working, or was stopping officially, and there's a transition now to a clinical trial coordination group. So what is the fact? The fact is there's a name change, and there will be a new mandate for the clinical trial coordination and facilitation group with new rules of procedure. Actually, the CTFG was asking for this to move more towards a legal body and to be more integrated in the network. So we have had out a call for new members to be there, and there will be a selection of chair and vice chair mid of February. Currently, there is formed a transition steering group, also together with HMA, CTFG members, EMA Commission, to define a work plan for the first 2 years. That should be done by April. And to tell you the truth, during this transition, the CTFG will work as usual, so business as usual. We will support and exchange, and then slowly transfer everything to this CTC group. So this is a big opportunity. So it's a big opportunity to enhance clinical trials future in Europe and to strengthen the network, to make it also easier for you when you're approaching the regulatory bodies. To give you a short outlook on this mandate, it is now mentioned that it's really an increased cooperation with relevant working groups in the regulatory network in Europe. So with Commission and HMA and EMA working groups, Currently, we have ongoing joint working on complex clinical trials question and answer update. This is jointly done the CTFG together with EMA and Commission. We also have another big group working on recommendation on decentralized clinical trials. This is done jointly with ethic committees from the CTEC group, the clinical trial expert group from the Commission, as well as the GCP inspectors working group. It's a bit slower than expected, also impacted by the situation we are in currently with the pandemic situation, but I think there will be some outcome this year. And I think this is also the opportunity with a new mandate to new cooperation, maybe even being observer in working groups. We still have also interaction with other working groups currently, but this will really facilitate the work we are doing. And also interesting for you, there's a task in the mandate to coordinate a one-stop shop for questions related to clinical trials, so that we really have one opinion in Europe, and it's done jointly together. The question is, how will it look like? This has to be determined. This has to be also figured out. You all know that we have currently an initiative already since a few years, this steering group, where we have 4 groups in the innovation networks, the CTFG, the HTA, EMA with ITF and Scientific Advice Working Party. Our first task really was to draw up the landscape of support for sponsors from the beginning, the first thought, the planning, the research, clinical trials, up to marketing authorization and life cycle management. So, and that may be a good opportunity to really foster these interactions and to think about a good cooperation, to feed back to you, just approaching one and not a couple of groups and get lost. Well, this work is ongoing and I think it will be intensified, but it's still open and has to be defined as explained. Further, sure, we will further look for evolution in clinical trials. There needs to be evolution, horizon scanning, new methodologies, also risk mitigation in clinical trials. This we have done all the years, we will do in future. And also we will further work on our harmonization and coordination to implement the regulation. I'm pretty sure we need more best practices, more common documents of common understanding. We will further support the city's development and future vigilance where needed. And a big work will be at the safety surveillance, the cooperation for assessment of reports. And we can go back and focus again on training, which is a little bit down during the COVID time, but we will restart this. So talked a lot on what we have achieved, what we are aiming on. I think it's good to have now the CTCG integrated in the regulatory network to foster the forces for clinical trials, to support you wherever we can, and to facilitate clinical trials and research and trials in Europe. Thank you. Open for questions.
Thank you very much, Elke. That was a great talk, and we will be discussing the details later in the panel discussion, of course. So we're moving on to the second lecture that will be given by Mireille Müller from Novartis in Basel in Switzerland. Mireille is the Executive Regulatory Policy Director at Novartis, and she focuses on clinical trials, advanced therapy, medicinal products, and personalized medicines. She's involved in several IMI projects that are indicated over there, and is part of several FPR groups such as the Clinical Development Expert Group, the Expedited Pathways and Scientific Advice Groups, and is on the Personalized Medicine Working Group. She is also part of Europa Bio Group on advanced therapy, medicinal products, and policy. So the ideal person to also in a topic in a workshop that or an annual meeting that follows on a workshop on advanced medicinal products to tell us about the industry perspectives in the whole story. Mireille, please go ahead.
So thank you very much for the kind introduction. So today I will be delivering a talk on innovative trials and giving you the perspective of the industry. Here is an outline of what I will be covering today. And we dive right into the topic, future of clinical trials. So clinical research has undergone a fundamental shift over the last years, already before the pandemic, but even more so since. Many traditional processes taking on new formats to increase clinical development efficiencies, such as designing trials to be more patient-centric, and R&D costs, technology, digitalization of clinical trials, as well as advanced therapies, personalized medicines have impacted clinical research. As you see here on this slide, patient centricity, new innovative designs, which is the topic of today's discussion, and broader evidence generation toolkits and digitalization have had an impact on clinical research. FPA has been involved in that journey since years now. As you see from the previous data, Europe is facing increasing competition from other regions in the race for medical excellence. FPA has taken really a serious stance from the top level to the subgroups, supporting innovative clinical trials. In March 2020, FPA's subgroup has issued a position paper on all adaptive clinical trials, and as lately in October 2021, the FPA Complex Clinical Trial Group organized a multi-stakeholder workshop with over 400 participants. So let's see more in detail why complex clinical trials are important. Biomarkers give incredible new information. Biomarker testing is a way to look for genes, proteins, and other substances that can provide information about diseases. For example, some biomarkers can affect how cancer treatment works. Biomarker testing may help to choose the most appropriate treatment for a specific patient. This is what we call personalized medicine or precision medicine. As you see here on your right, the number and granularity of cancer biomarkers has evolved significantly since the 90s. Once you incorporate a biomarker into a trial, there is less risk of bias. We will see in the next slide how the use of biomarkers in adaptive, innovative trials has revolutionized many diseases, but started with oncology. Adaptive designs are also considered more ethical because some patients have better odds of getting effective treatment and quickening the pace of treatment discovery. Let's go to another example, which is a very current one as it relates to COVID-19. Amongst all the COVID trials shown here, and its platform trials shown here on your right, I take only one example, which is the recovery trial from the University Oxford. It's an intent to treat trial and a platform trial, as I said. This trial was designed for flexibility so investigators can make real-time decision once an arm produces data, being it thumbs up or down. The protocol put no restriction on the enrollee number nor their age. And when dexamethasone proved to be helpful, it became standard of care. When hydroxychloroquine proved to be ineffective, the trial arm was dropped. It allowed to tackle research questions very efficiently in record time and will hopefully prepare us for a future pandemic. Let's look at the range of innovative clinical trial design. Recent advances in drug discovery and biotechnology have accelerated tremendously the detection of treatment candidates. As we saw in the previous slides, diagnostics have become more refined, leading to more precisely defined disease description, hence smaller patient populations for targeted therapies. The classical two-arm parallel group traditional randomized controlled clinical trial have thus become one of the rate limiting factors, and more treatment trial designs have been called for. The master protocol framework remedy the problem because such trial design allow for the evaluation of investigational treatment in multiple subgroups for a study population within the same overall clinical structure. Complex, advanced, innovative design use adaptive methods, such as the Bayesian methods and other clinical trial design techniques to increase efficiency. In this slide, you see several examples, such as basket trials, umbrella trials, platform trials, and historical control trials. Master protocol and complex innovative designs continue to provide frameworks that hold enormous promise for engaging patients more productively, increasing the overall efficiency and improving the successful outcome. So let's go one level deeper. Despite much research in statistical literature highlighting the potential advantages of adaptive designs over traditional fixed designs, the uptake of such methods in clinical research was rather slow. One major reason for this is that the different adaptations to trial design, as well as their advantages and limitations, remain unfamiliar to a large part of the community, with lack of expertise and experience amongst clinicians, trialists, and statisticians. Hence, the experience is gradual towards the different level of adaptation. For example, broadly used are simple adaptive trial designs such as dose dropping and group sequential. Then used to a lesser extent is the selective use of advanced techniques such as master protocol designs we just saw, umbrella, basket, and platform designs, modeling and simulation used for pediatric extrapolation. Finally, true invention and trailblazing efforts include placebo substitution and historical control of phase 3 trials. If we go a level further, adaptive trial designs have their specific benefits, and I will pick only 3 examples. Adaptive randomization allows patients to be assigned to treatment arms that are more likely to be effective. We will see that in the next slides. This, in turn, may result with reduced sample size. Sample size re-estimation allows the testing of if assumptions still hold true and ensuring that the trial retains sufficient power to assess trial objectives that is key for success. Finally, adaptive enrichment design gives trial participants a better chance to receive their personalized optimal treatment, and those results in a higher response rate on the trial. Let's go into a specific example, and I picked only 2 examples. The first one here is in a very small patient population. It's an umbrella trial, epoch 1 to 4, with canakinumab. Familial Mediterranean fever, mevalonate kinase deficiency, and tumor necrosis factors receptor associated periodic syndrome, TRAPS, are monogenic autoinflammatory diseases that are characterized by recurrent fever episodes such as variable skin, joint, and serosal involvement. Flares last several days or weeks and affect functional capacity and quality of life. Some of these lead to long-term complications. This trial consisted of one cohort per disease. Each cohort followed the same design here, as you can see here on the figure. The design of the trial was chosen to address the rarity of the diseases, the wide age range, and the need for a randomized controlled trial while exploiting the hypothesis of a common mediator. It also allowed the creation of a larger safety database than what could have been generated for one single disease. I have another example here, I-SPY2, in a much larger patient population. Actually, of note, it inspired a similar setup for a COVID trial. I-SPY2 trial of neoadjuvant treatment for locally advanced breast cancer established a new benchmark for efficiency of phase 2 trials. It is widely regarded as a pioneer of the platform trial. I-SPY2's success continues to be a major influence of the development of next generation trial designs in oncology and beyond. So I-SPY2 breaks from the traditional randomized clinical trial model by employing an adaptive model to increase the efficiency and minimize the numbers of participants. At consent, each of the new participants is classified in one of the 10 molecular subtypes, and each participant follows the 5 steps. The first is the adaptive randomization engine, step 1. The second is the endpoint assessed at surgery. Primary endpoint is residual cancer burden, 0, or pathological complete response as a surrogate endpoint, meaning the tumor has completely disappeared. Step 3 allows predictive probabilities of an IMP in the various subtypes are updated in real time. And finally, step 4 and 5 allow to add new IMPs and stop them if they reach fertility. If we go to the next slide, I can give you an overview and summarizing the benefits of complex clinical trials. The advantages of an adaptive design is the ability to use information that was not available at the start of the trial to improve efficiency. For patients, master protocols offer personalized treatment driven by their genetic subtype and biomarker makeup. They also allow for a greater chance to be enrolled in the most effective arm. An adaptive design can provide a greater chance to detect the true effect of a product, often with a smaller sample size in a shorter time frame. So in balance, our experience showed that the efficiency and benefits far outweighs the complexities. And then we go to the next slide. However, there are still some challenges, and complex clinical trials are not one size fits all. In recent years, solutions and directions become increasingly evident. As to the challenges, further improving technical and statistical capabilities in the national competent authorities and ethics committees for reviewing complex clinical trial protocols in a timely fashion would be welcome. Likewise, sponsors have to develop the best practices to describe and justify the choice of design and key design parameters, including their assumptions. Enhancing regulatory guidance on acceptable complex clinical trial designs, analysis and reporting would also be helpful. Finally, EMA could consider establishing a cluster with its agency peers to discuss complex clinical trial related issues. We have seen from the workshop in October the need for collaborative multi-stakeholder platform to facilitate interaction and learning amongst all these stakeholders. But of course, with keeping a careful line between advisory discussion and collaborative discussion, and respecting the mandates and responsibilities of each of the stakeholder groups. So there are still some practical issues in implementing complex clinical trials. These include appear with any program, but they might be even more acute with complex clinical trials. And as we are only a few days into the CTR implementation, it is too early to draw some conclusion. But areas are worth monitoring. For example, adaptation of endpoints during clinical trials requires a new CTA or modification. Seamless adaptive designs and between phases submission will require careful monitoring. The clinical research space is highly competitive, and I hope by now people realize the importance for Europe to ensure a healthy clinical research ecosystem. So, and this should be actually a common priority in the EU. The EU landscape is already a quite complex place to conduct clinical trials. There is a need to change for all stakeholders by prioritizing education activities, monitoring the impact of the clinical trial implementation on clinical trials, and maintaining and broadening the dialogue across all concerned stakeholders. In that, FPR very much welcomed the joint European Commission, EMA, and HMA initiative accelerating clinical trials in the EU. We have all a common goal to ensure patients a healthy clinical development landscape, enabling the generation of robust evidence for decision making. With that, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mireille. We will move on now to the third and final talk before the panel discussion, and that will be given by Gunilla Andrew-Nilsson from the Swedish MPA. Gunilla is head of the clinical trial and special permission at MPA in Sweden, and since the early 90s, she's held various positions within global R&D in the pharmaceutical industry, so she has experience from that side as well. Experience was including project and training management, and she was later a director of quality assurance. So she's seen all parts of the various developments that we have. Gunilla will now focus on the issue of patient-centric and decentralized clinical trial, a national project that was performed in Sweden. Gunilla, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak on this interesting topic. I am Gunilla Andrew-Nilsson, head of clinical trial at the Swedish Medical Product Agency, as we have heard before, and as such, we have had a great interest in looking into performing clinical trials decentralized. And I would like to talk to you a little bit about the project that we just recently finished. So the project we have been working on is between 2020 and 2021. We actually started just a couple of weeks before the pandemic hit us in Sweden. So it's not necessarily a project that is risen out of the pandemic, but it was really just in time we started this project, since the pandemic situation also have forced and perhaps made it a bit more as a burning platform to investigate the possibility to utilize decentralized tools and measures to perform clinical trials. But we carried out a feasibility study and a subsequent project about patient-centric decentralized clinical trials during this period. And the aim was to establish conditions for how interventional clinical trials can be carried out in Sweden. And we also would like to thank the Swedish Innovation Authority for partly financing the project. Just to set the setting right, this is how we have defined the centralized investigation of clinical trials. It can be described as a method for remotely and/or with the help of digital tools collecting data within the framework of the trial. It can be consent data, randomization, inclusion, but also safety and efficacy data for the investigation of medicinal products in the trial. Trials that contain both decentralized and traditional elements are often referred to as hybrid trials. So the project, why and how? We would like to increase the knowledge and the predictability about the conditions for conducting this type of clinical trials within Sweden. We wanted to see if more patients should be offered the opportunity to be included in a clinical trial regardless of where they live. Sweden is not a country where we have very many inhabitants, but we have quite some distance, geographic distance between where people actually live and the university or the big hospitals are located. We would also like to investigate whether this could increase the number of clinical trials. As part of the how, we really scrutinized regulations, guidelines, and established practices where we analyzed both internally and in workshops, nationally and also within the EU to understand if there were any hurdles and how those hurdles in that case could be overcome. We had also several advice meetings free of charge as part of the financing we had from the Innovation Agency regarding this decentralized element in investigation of clinical trials. As part of the project, we also invite the sponsors to participate with actual clinical trials as pilots. So let's talk a little bit about the pilots in the study. They were 5 interventional clinical trials with centralized elements that we followed in the project. The decentralized elements in one or more of these clinical trials included remote electronic consent, home sampling administered by the patient himself or herself, remote visits within the framework of the clinical trial, medical device solutions to capture symptoms of possible side effects, distribution of investigational medicinal products, and medical device solutions to register compliance to treatment. The 5 interventional clinical trials were spread over all phases, phase 1 to 4, in the development of of drugs, and also both inpatient and outpatient diseases were investigated in these clinical trials. And we have had a lot of questions about what kind of studies are beneficial to do decentralized if there are any particular phase or any particular disease, or but our answer from where we are standing at the moment in terms of our understanding is that it doesn't come to the particular phase or the particular disease. It's more an individual discussion and decision based on the nature of the individual clinical trial. So they can be utilized in all phases. It comes to how the trial is set up and what kind of digital and decentralized tools are possible to utilize. The project deliverables, we have decided not to write a guidance document. We wanted rather to be more hands-on, to give concrete advice to those that actually are about to apply or to plan for decentralized clinical trials. So we have set up a dedicated website to the centralized clinical trial, where we continuously update with question and answers in support of the centralized clinical trials. We also, as part of the project, have interviewed sponsors, investigators of the pilot studies, just to preempt the best practice and to summarize those in favor of those that would like to do the same or to benefit from others' experiences. So at the website, you can also find written summaries of the interviews made with sponsors and investigators. We can say that as regulators, we are more confident and knowledgeable about the DCT approach after this project. We were quite keen to see this started because we had a suspicion that sometimes sponsors have an idea of that it is the regulators or the regulations that are the hurdles that you need to overcome in order to do clinical trials in a new way. And therefore, we really wanted to start this as the regulators in order to take away that understanding from the sponsors. And we can see by the questions we get and also all the discussions and dialogues we have with stakeholders now that it's more of a partnership when we talk about centralized trial rather than a persuasion from the sponsors that this is a good thing. So we have accomplished something, I think, in the way we talk to each other over this kind of clinical trials. We can also see that there is an increased number of applications containing centralized clinical trial methods in the studies. So what can we say to you that are in the progress of putting a clinical trial, a centralized clinical trial up for approval? Well, planning is really essential, and all the decentralized steps in a clinical trial requires really a careful and study-specific risk-benefit assessment. And you really need to think all the eventualities through before deciding on which direction you would like to go. We are also in an agreement that the reasons for performing decentralized elements must be based on a scientific basis and may, for example, be an increased opportunity to include the relevant study population, collection of additional relevant data, reduced risk or burden for patients. It could never be only cost efficiency as a reason to introduce decentralized elements. It needs to be part of the nature and benefit the patient and the risk benefit of the whole clinical trial in order for us to approve these elements. The same requirements regarding ICH, GCP, GMP, and all other standards and the scientific value of the study and the safety of the subjects apply to decentralized trials as to traditional trials. The investigator's overall responsibility in the study applies even if different approaches take place at locations other than the trial site itself. Still, the investigator's oversight that we are assuming that the investigator still keeps. That is really core of the performance of a clinical trial. Decentralized elements are considered as new approaches. Therefore, we encourage sponsors to describe the implementation of these steps in more detail compared to traditional study protocols, just for the regulators' possibility of understanding each step in the process and how they are conceived by you. the use of decentralized elements should be justified and considered in the protocol's risk-benefits assessment. And what will happen now, since the project ended just before Christmas? Well, we will continue to have a supporting role for the issues over which the agency has direct influence at the national level and work with the centralized clinical trials on an EU level. We know that there are a lot of EU projects and also a clinical trial facilitation group where the clinical trial agency experts are working, have a subgroup discussing just decentralized trials, and we also know that there might be a guideline under production, and we are participating in that activity in order to share our experience. We will also continue to provide regulatory guidance and decentralized elements in the clinical trials. Don't be shy. Get in contact with us through our web page. The project leader, Stina Löfling, is still working with centralized clinical trials. And also do visit our website, where you have all these question and answers reflecting all the various steps in the planning and performance of the clinical trial. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gunilla, for this great talk. And I think we had a fascinating 3 talks that all focused around a central item of our clinical trials in the future. So let's move back to the Slido questions that you had before the session started and look at your answers there. And then in the first question that were the keywords that came to mind when you think of changes in the landscape of trial performance, the word decentralization clearly came up as the winner in this respect, although there are other issues there that are obviously also important. And if we go to the next one, the second question, the word cooperation was central into the answers over there, as is standardization. So I think there's quite a lot of interest in the issues of decentralization and cooperation. If you have further questions, please enter them into the Slido, but we do have quite a few questions on Slido already, and maybe, Maggie, if you could show the first questions that are put in on the screen now. And then we will start the discussion with the panelists. Maybe just to start from the perspective of the cooperation, Elke, do you think that the role of the CTCG will be very much different from the role of CTFG, or is it just a shift of focus a little bit and not a major change?
It's a bit hard to tell you now when we are just starting the transition. I really think that there will be a change in future, and that was also the aim when we pushed for a mandate change, because we wanted to have a change. We wanted to have a settled role within the network, put it this way, to support clinical trials and to really push further for our harmonization procedures and opinions throughout Europe. So I would think there's a change. Yeah, there will be a change. Sorry.
And maybe if we move to the others, maybe this is a good question for Mireille, and for the audience, if you want to really stress one of the questions that has been put forward by one of your colleagues, just put your thumbs up and the question will move up higher in the ranks. So the first question from the audience there is for you, Mireille. What, in your opinion, are the biggest barriers for the implementation of adaptive designs?
So I would start first with the very beginning, meaning the access to scientific advice. That early dialogue has been stressed also by the CTFG recommendations. And that's really one aspect to take into account, and that often it's a very dynamic field, hence it needs to be really timely. Otherwise, ensure broader familiarity with adaptive complex clinical trials is as well important. Both within the industry, it is important to have better understanding of adaptive trials. Some are very experienced, others are less. And then likewise at the national competent authorities, as well as the ethics committees. The ethics committees have been relatively less exposed to these kinds of trials, and they have limited resources, so a special effort would be needed there to help them to cope with the complexity of those trials. Now we will have also to see how the implementation with the clinical trial regulation will work for these trials, especially considering that there are limited opportunities to file, or at least it needs some ahead planning to file substantial modification. And then most of these trials are conducted on global level, hence alignment with at least the major health authorities would be really very much welcome. Not that we have too much of a gap between regions. That's quite important. There are also, I just wanted to highlight here that there are initiatives such as EU Pearl, which are trying to federate all the sponsors and come up with best practices, templates, etc., to have a more coherent take at these trials. So that's also. Solutions are in progress, but there is still some work to be done. And the multi-stakeholder dialogue has to continue to enable that.
Related to that multi-stakeholder dialogue, as far as I know, most of the adaptive trials were academic from design. At least it started with an academic design and then involved other partners as well, the stakeholders as well. When you gave your talk, it came to my mind that there's been a proposal from FDA to have it's not a real adaptive design, but if companies are developing drugs for the same target in the same population, but there's just different drugs, how would we think of using a standard control arm and then just plug in your single arm from the company perspective? That's a kind of adaptive design as well. How is that perceived within companies?
That's exactly why I showed you the example of iSpy, because I believe that was one of the key successes where you were able to have different IMPs tested, some were successful and have led to approvals. So this is one example. I believe the industry is willing to cooperate, and there is actually a special moment at the moment where we have seen also for COVID the level of cooperation is there.
Right. And this is a question for you, Gunilla. You were basically there's stating here fantastic presentation. I think that's a big compliment, of course. With the new IVDR, how do we bring novel devices to the level of acceptance at health authority globally? I think you're muted still.
I would prefer to continue being muted because this is not a very easy question to answer. But it is a very good question. And fortunately, we have still a couple of months before we actually have to deal with the new IVDR regulation. But I think it's an opportunity now. It's a window of opportunity when the IVDR regulation comes in force to to address the issue with precision medicine or personalized medicine, because that is also, I heard Mireille talked about adaptive design, complex design, but it's also meeting the higher and higher demands of being able to treat personalized. And I think the IVDR part of that complex machinery that accomplish the precision medicine and personalized medicine is going to be an important part of that, as well as artificial intelligence, those decision trees and decision, what do you say in English, apparatus that you need to utilize in order to get precision medicine in place. So I think that it's a challenge for us, but it's also an opportunity. And I hope that we can work together, because I think that Elke perhaps can give a comment, but I think that the regulators, we are also new to the IVDR regulation, and we also need to try to understand it better.
Elke?
To fill in here, that's why I think we really worked on recommendations to really identify what is needed for an IVD in clinical trials. When we have the IVDR and the clinical trial regulation, and to tell you the truth, it was not an easy job to figure out when you need what, or to give you some advice here. And I hope this question answer document will come out soon, so you can at least judge when you can use an IVD and what's needed, when you have to have a performance study in addition, and so on. So it is not easy, but I think we have found a quite pragmatic solution, so we can deal with it. It always depends how you judge your biomarker and what you need it for. Put it this way in short. So it's not easy, and we all have to learn how to deal with it, how to assess it. But looking forward that it works, and support your randomization or your selection later on.
And I can also stress what Mireille was talking about when it comes to advice, scientific and regulatory advice. That is also a tool for the agencies to learn more. So we are welcoming the advice also from that perspective as agencies, I would say.
Another question. Clearly, one of the missions of CDDF is to help out here and make sure that we get together and have workshops and the annual meeting like this and discuss topics like this. Is there any plan within the EMA bodies to also work on an educational aspect from regulatory view to help out the investigators throughout the world? There, we do have scientific advice. We can get to CTCG. We can call you, I understand, for decentralized trials. But is there any concerted action in trying to bring together people and say, here we are, and this is what we can help you and offer you? Maybe.
My understanding is that this is all set up or now thought of for within the regulatory framework to 2025. Currently, you can approach the EMA and ask for an ITF to present what you want to develop, to have your early plans. So there are some projects out there where you can get support, also if you're an academics or small, medium enterprise, but also large pharma, it doesn't matter. So there are certain tools out there. That's what we wanted to draw up with the INO, to have a little bit of the landscape and to tell you when best to approach it. But I understand it's not easy in Europe. Yes, it is not, but they definitely help out, low cost, no cost, or to get an opinion or to get some support.
Yeah, well, what I was intending to focus on is there any plan at the regulatory level to have educational sessions for a broader community than just one pharmaceutical company or one individual?
There is an EU-funded project that's been going on since 2019, I think, called the STARS, Strengthening Regulatory Science, where I think more than 20 agencies in Europe, alongside universities with EMA and also EU Commission, are working together and have been working together on identifying curricula, vendors that can contribute with regulatory training. So please, perhaps someone can help. I can give you the link to the website. There's quite a lot of interesting things going on in the STARS project. So not necessarily from the CTCG and HMA and EMA itself, but rather from other bodies that we as an agencies or as an organization work together with in order to enhance training.
Good. Maybe related to this, there's a second question here for Elke, but you could all answer this one, but it focuses on Germany in this case. Clearly, the experience on decentral trials is now being presented from Sweden. But if we think about decentral trials in other countries, in this case Germany, what are the biggest national hurdles to overcome in a big country like Germany?
Well, I think currently we have not fully decentralized clinical trials. I'm understanding that one consortium is testing a fully decentralized trials versus partial decentralized trials. We have already ongoing approved trials where we have decentralized elements in, and also during pandemic situations there were some support to have, for example, shipment to your patients, or have online visits and so on. So remembering the guidance on clinical trials by the Commission HMA, and so there is some thoughts about it, some support about it. For elements, I think it is fine. Hurdles is that we have maybe strict national laws to some extent. For the shipment, for example, that needs to overcome. But I think first we have to have a common European opinion to bring it forward, and that's why I think this joint cooperation of all involved parties here, like Commission, ethics, and national competent authorities, to think about and to support where it is possible and what to think about is of help. So I think it's a stepwise process. Elements are fine. Fully decentralized trials, I think we need to gain a bit more experiences. What is feasible, what is manageable, to have really an even benefit risk and no increased risk, so everything is mitigated.
Yeah,
I think the experience is needed.
Well, that's clear. And maybe here's another question. Mireille, maybe you could be the first to answer it because it also involves all three of the lecturers. There's clearly a change in the paradigm of the way we perform clinical trials. It becomes more and more complex. And this is an interesting statement. How can we address the unmet educational need of healthcare professionals as the paradigm is evolving?
So I will address part of the question and will ask for probably Elke, and who might be also more informed in terms of the ACT EU initiative. But from the workshop we had last October, the need for education has been clearly highlighted, and I believe the complications arises how to identify the right platform who would be trusted, and also federating all the input from the different stakeholders. So that's something which is in discussion at the moment, and we will certainly continue to work on that topic, but no definite answer to that at the moment.
Does FBI have any plans in that direction currently?
We are working on different scenarios, so this is certainly part of our work plan.
Okay, thanks. Here's another question. This is particularly for you, Elke, I guess. Does the CTR, the new CTR, provide an opportunity or a hurdle towards innovative clinical trial design, or is there no hurdle?
Well, nothing comes without a hurdle. No, I think, well, it's just, we have just received the first clinical trial, and actually it's a transition of a large platform trial. So I would call it a complex trial. We just received today. So, well, I think it's feasible. The CTS itself is a tool, and the regulation is actually improving harmonization in Europe, and therefore you can submit to all countries at once, and you get a harmonized opinion, and then the approval should be much easier. I wouldn't say you don't get questions anymore, but I think you have a harmonized assessment, and that should really facilitate clinical trials in Europe. If it's a complex trial or not a complex trial. And also, I think in the part 1, when we assess the core, the protocol ID, and so on, then the ethics are on board too. So you have it all together at once. Therefore, I would think it should facilitate also complex trials in Europe to make it much easier and have a harmonized opinion. On the other side, there are 1-2 shortcomings. We need to see how it's worked, and it will be set up also in cities upcoming, how it may impact. But if you have a quality design trial, it should work. I don't see a major hurdle here. We all know that maybe substantial modification may impact, but don't know. We need to see what the experience will gain us to, and how to tackle this.
Right.
I'm sure there will be a solution.
Yeah, Mireille, you raised your hand.
Yes, it's the substantial modification. The substantial modification, and then also finding a way to be able to, especially for the large platform trials which are running over a long period, a way to package the data packages in a way that is both compatible with the design of the trial and compatible with regulation. But the major question mark is really on substantial modification.
Yeah, and that's maybe you need to think about not having it all at one trial, maybe have it, as you said, in data packages or parts of the trial to run in parallel. But this is also in discussion currently with EMA, and we hope to give some advice in the upcoming question and answer document here too. So we're thinking about it too. Yeah.
It's going to be more complex if we would put in further elements of decentral aspects into the clinical trials, because that means that patients will be remotely, they may be anywhere, the data come in via digital routes. Is that going to make it more complex? Or is it still?
I think it's an additional level for the performance to conduct the trial, for sure. You need to have maybe a bit more thinking about your risk strategy or risk identification and mitigation a bit more. So I think operationally it may be in the beginning, when you're not used to it, really a bit more complex, yeah. So or innovative, but yeah. I don't see that it's a hurdle. It's not a hurdle.
There's another question here for you, Elke, I think. How would you describe the interface of the CTCG to ethics and notified bodies at present and potentially in the future? So is there going to be a change after the end of the grace period of the CTR?
Well, I would not link it to the grace period of the regulation, but currently I think we work tightly together with ethics in the Commission CTEC group. We in CTFG and upcoming CTCG, we cooperate with nationally tightly with our ethics, so there is some exchange already given. In the assessment, that will be much more tighter, as explained, and we also thinking about to really discuss more topics where needed with the ethics in advance. So I think there will be a tighter cooperation in future. There has to be, because we are working together and it has to be harmonized. So it will not be a harmonization between the ethics, but in Europe on the regulatory bodies.
Right. And then maybe, I guess you've already answered the question, but let me ask it again. It's there. Will CTC provide individual advice procedures?
I have can't answer at this time point. Sorry, it's too early. We are just in discussion, so
No,
it's
but
too early.
I understand. Individual
it's this one-stop shop. We need to think how this one-stop shop. I think we need to think about who's addressing what. There's definitely a role of CTCG, but it will be in the network.
Yeah, it's in program. Well, in development, we might say, yeah. And that's going to be part of the discussion you will have with everybody, all the stakeholders involved, I'm sure. Another question on the IVDR and the IVD. Will ongoing clinical performance studies submitted under the IVD require to be transitioned under the upcoming IVDR? And if so, by when will this need to occur? No clear answer to that. Any of you?
No, unfortunately. No.
It's good that we also have some issues that we cannot answer. Yesterday, Mireille, we had a discussion on one of the workshops of CDDF last year on gene and cell therapies. Clearly a very complex procedure as well from the manufacturing issue already. And we had a discussion there on master protocols that could help on basically individual applications of cell therapies for patients. How do you see that perspective in the near future? Are we going to see more development of master protocols? I mean, the adaptive design is already a kind of a master protocol, but even if you have very individualized treatments, you would like to compare to other patients that had similar but not the same treatment. How is that going to evolve?
Absolutely, you are absolutely right, especially for cell and gene products, master protocols, and also historical control trials might be a solution. So this is certainly something we are looking into, and we have to gain additional experience on that. Internally or within the industry, so that we can learn more on what are the key parameters to pay attention to. But this is actually, master protocols are very nicely suited for a small population. They can be used for large population. That's why the two examples, very small population and very large population, but they can be really nicely suited for very small population or for pediatric trials, for example.
Now, in the adaptive trial designs that at least I know of, it's mostly focused on outcome. Of course, you take also into account safety. And the trial design, the master protocol that we discussed yesterday, it included almost everything. I mean, the phase 1 design, the dose finding element was there. The efficacy design, which is basically the phase 3 part, was there. So it was all included in one design, which sounds almost too good to be true that this might be working.
Actually, it needs a super well thought out. You need to have really experts on board to be able to run this level of complexity, because what is important in these types of trial is all the planning ahead of the implementation of the trial, which is really very substantial.
Yeah.
Gunilla wanted to make a comment.
Yes, thank you. I think that we have been talking about the new regulation on clinical trials, and Elke and I, we are representing the part of the agency that assess and approve clinical trials or protocols. But we are not the one that are taking the data into consideration and approving marketing application authorities. So I think you need to elongate your thoughts a little bit, because it's not just to have a protocol approved. You also need to make sure that the data you gather, the analysis you are doing, and all the effort that goes into performing that protocol is actually going to be part of then the marketing approval. And those guys that are looking into that, they are different in their mindset than Elke and I assessing a clinical trial protocol. So, and I think that needs to be remembered. And I also think that it needs to be remembered that the regulation is regulating the assessment and the application of a clinical trial. It does not necessarily, it's not very rigid on how to perform your clinical trial, or what methodology to use, what have you. That is not regulated in the regulation. You have the general considerations on clinical trials, the guideline E8, which is under review, I think, and lots of other guidelines that also needs to be taken into consideration before putting your clinical trial together. So I think that we shouldn't think of the regulation as being the only hurdle or the only boundaries that we need to overcome. It's actually to perform a clinical trial that is safe for the patient, that is safeguard the data integrity, and also make the companies and the researchers able to actually get a new drug on the market, because that is the ultimate goal of the effort. And I think that needs to be remembered.
It almost sounds as if this is a place for CDDF to have a workshop on how to perform a clinical trial, where you and Elke and the others could give your own perspective, but also the people that have to assess the data can give their perspective. We have to learn from each other, of course, and this is the ideal point in time with the new regulation coming into place. After 1 or 2 years, just say, well, what are the aspects that you need to focus on when you perform an individual clinical trial? So maybe this is something that CDDF could pick up and be an independent party and organize that in 2 years' time.
Sure.
Gunilla, you mentioned that I'd like to ask you a very numerical question. You mentioned that there's an increase that's on one of your slides in the number of applications on decentral trials to the MPA in Sweden. Can you give us a kind of impression of that number? No,
I cannot. Because we have not yet, the increase I was talking about was a wish to see an increase in the number of decentralized clinical trial applications. And I think that the applications we got just before Christmas is more a reflection of the new regulation coming into force, and also in Sweden we changed the fees just before Christmas. So the applications that came before Christmas is not necessarily representative. But we had a meeting with the pharma industry just a couple of weeks ago, and we know that there are lots of this centralized clinical trial application coming, and hopefully they will also be performed in Sweden. But this is not just a thing that you will see some companies doing just for fun. This is really something that are here to stay, I think, and we just need to get more experience and make sure that we have learning transfer between regulators and researchers and the industry and the patients, because the patients is really the one that perhaps benefit most from the centralized clinical trials. And so let's work together, and this will be fine, I think.
Maybe from that perspective, just out of curiosity, there are some concerns that there's a patient benefit here, but there's also a risk that there might be a safety aspect that might be overlooked if the patient doesn't see the healthcare professional anymore or less frequent. How did that work in the trials that you ran in the pilot?
It worked fine. It worked just fine. But you also need to remember that the pandemic, but not only the pandemic, the society is on a digitalization route on a whole. So even if the pandemic hadn't came into force, I'm sure that the digitalization has brought the healthcare and everything forward anyway. So it's not a rare thing now to see your position over online or in an app or anything. I think that is really something that is here to stay in the society. And hence, we need to take that into consideration when looking into clinical trials. But we also know that what we think might be a benefit for the patient, being able to participate, seeing your physician online, having someone coming to your home to take samples, getting drugs on your doorstep, and what have you. Not every patient is comfortable with that. Some patients actually do want to go and see their physician. They do want to go to the pharmacy to get the drugs. So I know that in the US, where the centralized clinical trials have been or are more common, they see that there is not necessarily one size fits all. So I think really to embrace the centralized clinical trials, we need to see them as hybrid trials, even when it comes to how the patient prefer to be managed through the clinical trial, because you might have 3 or 4 or 5 alternatives for a patient on how to what route you should take participating in a clinical trial in the future. And I think we need to there's no going back. We just need to see this through and work together and make sure that we share experience.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think we've managed to handle all the questions already. We are early, but I'd like to end the session here and give people more time for a break, which is going to be a 1.5 hour break now, because we also didn't include a break between the panel discussion and the lectures. So thank you so much for your fantastic lectures. Thank you for all the answers to the questions that you gave. I think this was a wonderful experience for all of us. And I would like to tell the audience that we will finish here and like to see you back for the next session that will be on lessons learned from acceleration in pediatric oncology programs. That session will start at 15:55 Central European time. You can calculate your own time zone from there. And we hope to see you back on the screen at 5 minutes to 4 Central European time. Thank you so much and see you then.